Somewhere between your first cup of coffee and your second, there's a quieter alternative that's been part of daily life in Japan for centuries, long before anyone thought to measure it in a lab. It doesn't promise to erase a decade overnight, and no honest conversation about it should claim that. But what it actually does, consistently over years of ordinary use, may be more interesting than any single dramatic number ever could be. There's a particular kind of tiredness that doesn't have an obvious cause. Sleep doesn't quite fix it. Skin looks a shade duller than it used to. Something about the body feels like it's running on a slightly different setting than it did a few years back. Most people never hear the actual name for this outside a doctor's office. Chronic, low-grade inflammation, the quiet, background kind that isn't a symptom of anything specific, but that seems to build up over time and shows up in skin, energy, and how the day simply feels. This video isn't about presenting a single cup of tea as a miracle, and it isn't about suggesting Japanese women have discovered some secret nobody else has access to. It's about a specific, well-studied plant compound found in one particular daily habit, matcha, and what a growing body of research actually says about it, without inflating it into something it isn't. It's also worth saying plainly, before going any further, that no cup of tea rewinds a decade of skin aging on its own, and any claim that sounds that dramatic deserves a healthy dose of skepticism, including the number in this video's own title. Let's start with what matcha actually is, because it's easy to lump it in with green tea, generally without understanding what makes it different. Ordinary green tea is brewed by steeping leaves in hot water and then discarding them. Matcha is the whole leaf, grown in shade, dried, and ground into a fine powder that you then whisk directly into water and drink in its entirety. That distinction matters because when you drink matcha, you're consuming the full leaf rather than just what dissolved out of it during a few minutes of steeping. This is the first reason matcha tends to contain meaningfully higher concentrations of certain plant compounds than a standard cup of steeped green tea. I've written a guide that compares the daily habits Japanese women have followed for generations to age more slowly, stay active, and maintain healthy skin and a strong body well into their 80s. It's called Still Young in Japan, and I'd love to help you do the same. Right now, the guide is 98 pages long, but everyone who purchases it this month will receive all new chapters added over the next few weeks completely free of charge. Scan the QR code or click the link below to get your copy and start aging on your own terms today. The compound most researchers focus on is a type of catechin called EGCG, short for epigallocatechin gallate. Catechins are a category of antioxidants naturally found in tea leaves, and EGCG is generally considered the most studied and most biologically active of the group. Antioxidants, in general terms, help the body manage oxidative stress, a natural byproduct of everyday cellular activity that, when it accumulates unchecked over years, is associated with the kind of gradual cellular damage linked to visible skin aging and, more broadly, to age-related decline throughout the body. Research on EGCG specifically has explored its relationship to inflammation and oxidative stress. And some studies have looked at topical and dietary green tea catechins in relation to skin health, though it's worth being honest that most of this research is still developing, and no legitimate study claims that drinking matcha will turn back a specific number of years on its own. Picture a woman named Sato in her early 60s who has started most of her mornings with a small bowl of matcha for as long as she can remember, prepared the traditional way with a bamboo whisk and a few minutes of quiet before the rest of the house wakes up. She never thought of it as medicine. It was simply part of how her mornings began, the same as anyone else might reach for coffee. What's worth noticing isn't that Sato has skin untouched by time, because no realistic habit does that for anyone. It's that a small, repeated ritual like this one tends to layer onto everything else in a person's routine, quietly reinforcing a slower, more intentional start to the day. The second point worth understanding is how matcha compares to coffee, since so many people are looking for exactly this kind of substitution. Matcha does contain caffeine, so it isn't a caffeine-free alternative, but it also contains an amino acid called L-theanine, which research suggests may influence how that caffeine is experienced and released in the body, often described as a steadier, more even source of alertness rather than the sharper spike and subsequent crash many people associate with coffee. For someone who's noticed that afternoon energy, dips have gotten more pronounced with age, or who deals with disrupted sleep and doesn't want to add more caffeine-related jitteriness into the mix, this is a genuinely practical reason to consider matcha as a substitution worth trying, rather than assuming all caffeinated drinks behave identically in the body. The third point connects matcha to something bigger than the cup itself, the ritual around it. Traditional tea preparation, even in its simplified, everyday form, involves a short pause, A few minutes of focused, unhurried attention, often without a phone in hand. Chronic stress and elevated cortisol are associated with their own contribution to inflammation and to the kind of skin changes people often lump together as simply aging, a daily ritual that forces a brief pause. Whatever that ritual happens to be, may support stress regulation over time, not because of any ingredient in the cup, but because of the 5 quiet minutes surrounding it. This is worth mentioning honestly. Some of the benefit people report from a matcha habit may come from the compound itself, and some of it may come from the pause. And it's difficult to fully separate the two, which is part of what makes it a genuinely reasonable habit to build, regardless of which piece deserves more credit. The fourth point is about inflammation more broadly, because it's the thread connecting matcha to almost everything else this channel talks about. Chronic low-grade inflammation isn't caused by any single missing ingredient, and it isn't solved by any single addition either. It's influenced by diet as a whole, by sleep quality, by stress levels, and by movement, among other things. A daily cup of matcha isn't a replacement for any of that, and treating it as a standalone fix while ignoring the rest would be missing the point. What it can reasonably be is one small, additive piece within a broader pattern that already includes things like eating until comfortably satisfied, rather than overly full, walking regularly, and getting consistent, adequate sleep. There's also a practical side worth mentioning, since so many people try matcha once, don't enjoy the taste or the slightly grassy bitterness, and quietly give up on it altogether. The quality and preparation of matcha matter more than people expect. A lower grade matcha, often the kind sold cheaply for smoothies or baking, tends to taste noticeably more bitter and less pleasant than a ceremonial or higher grade matcha meant for drinking on its own. Preparation matters too, since matcha whisked with water that's too hot can taste harsh and overly astringent, while water just below boiling, combined with a bit more whisking than most people initially attempt, produces a smoother, slightly sweeter result. None of this is about needing special equipment or an elaborate ceremony. It's simply about giving the habit a fair, pleasant first impression, rather than judging it based on a rushed, poorly prepared cup that never had a chance to be enjoyable. The fifth point is one worth stating plainly because so much wellness content skips past it. Individual results vary, and matcha isn't appropriate or advisable for everyone. People who are sensitive to caffeine, pregnant, managing certain heart conditions, or taking specific medications should talk to a doctor before adding a new daily caffeinated habit, since even a naturally occurring compound can interact with existing health conditions or prescriptions. This isn't a reason to avoid matcha altogether. It's a reason to treat it the way you'd treat any other habit that affects your body daily, with a little personal context rather than blanket assumptions. There's a broader idea worth sitting with here, because it applies to matcha and to almost every other habit this channel has ever covered. The appeal of a headline like 1 cup, 10 years younger is obvious, and it's exactly why headlines like that get written, even when no serious research actually supports that specific number. What the research does support is more modest and, in its own way, more reassuring. A small, daily habit, repeated for years, built from an ingredient with real, studied properties, layered on top of a pause that itself may be doing quiet work of its own. That's not a miracle. It's simply what a sustainable habit looks like when you follow it out over a decade instead of a week. None of this is about presenting matcha as something only Japanese women benefit from, or suggesting that anyone who's never had a cup has somehow missed their chance. Habits like this are available to absolutely anyone. And the ingredients involved, tea leaves, a bit of quiet time, a small daily pause, aren't exclusive to any single culture or income level. If there's one thing worth taking from this, it's a shift in expectation rather than a promise. Don't look for a single cup to change your skin overnight, because it won't, and anyone claiming otherwise isn't being fully honest with you. Look instead for what a small, repeated ritual can quietly add to years you were going to live through anyway. A slightly steadier morning, a few minutes of intentional pause, and one more small piece supporting a body that's already doing its best to keep up with everything you ask of it. Healthy aging was never really about a single dramatic fix. It's about the quiet, unremarkable habits stacked one on top of another, year after year, the kind that don't promise 10 years back, but that make the years still ahead feel a little steadier, a little calmer, and a little more your own. If you decide to try building this into your own mornings, give it more than a single cup before deciding how you feel about it. The taste tends to grow on people once it's prepared well, and the effects of any habit like this, whether it's the compound itself or the quiet ritual around it, are the kind that reveal themselves over weeks and months, not over a single sitting. That patience is really the whole point. Nothing about healthy aging responds well to being rushed, and this is no exception.